Joel Beardshaw, lead game designer at Us2 Games.
Hello Josh.
Thank you for joining me for this first iteration of our new Voices format. A lot of people in the team often do industry talks, and we want a place for them to live on beyond that talk.
It's exciting to be recording some stuff with you and to be part of the first wave.
So the first talk is the talk from Develop 2023.
Yeah.
Approachable Tactics, How to Adapt Complex Genres.
Yeah, and it's a talk about Desta and some of the process we went through on the game design side in prototyping it.
Desta being a game we released on Netflix last year.
Desta, The Memories Between, which released on Netflix in 2022, and then we released it on Steam and Switch last year in 2023, April time. Let's hit it. So, who am I? You kind of already introduced me a little bit, but my name is Joel. I'm one of the lead game designers at Us2 Games, and I was the lead game designer on Desta, The Memories Between from the start of the project to the end, and I use he, him, and they, them pronouns. This is my rather eclectic game history, my bibliography, videography, gameography, I suppose. For various games I've worked on, ranging from cartoony racing games to very serious first-person shooters to joining Us2 Games in 2016 to make Morning Valley 2 as a senior level designer, and then been here ever since, worked on Assemble with Care, and then Desta.
So who would this talk be most useful for, do you think?
I think this talk is aimed at anyone with an interest in game design. It's definitely from a game designer's perspective. People thinking about how their game ideas form from like first ideas and turning it into like a solid game idea that you can kind of take forward into production. So that could be people who already have experience, or it could be people like making stuff in like a hobbyist setting as well. I still think it's useful to think about these things even in that kind of like more crafty space. So what's this talk going to go through? It's going to go through where did Desta come from? It's going to talk through deconstructing and reconstructing a genre, tactics, the genre that Desta sits in. It's going to have a bit of a production example, and then at the end I'm going to kind of surmise with some takeaways. So what is Desta, The Memories Between? I'm going to start by showing you a little trailer.
I keep having the weirdest dreams about my hometown. I've not been back there in 2 years. Not since Dad's memorial. Now Mum's trying to sell the place. I can't find the words to reach her. Dad would know what to say. He used to have us throw this ball back and forth to work out our problems.
So you came back, Desta, after all this time? You can't just show up and expect everything to be normal.
I'm sorry. I should have kept in touch. I've imagined these conversations in my head 100 times. But I think I'm working my way through it.
Well, if it isn't Desta. Sleeping in class again.
Have I had it all wrong?
You look like you could use a friend right now.
I can't keep running. I've got to find the right words. All these dreams. Let's see how far they take us.
So that was a bit of a peek at what Desta is if you're not familiar or if you haven't played it in a little while. But to kind of summarize what the game is, it's a character-driven game about like grounded characters. It's a turn-based tactics game. You probably saw the kind of the grid-based movement, the kind of taking turns, the kind of like the HP above people's heads. It kind of takes a lot of its cues from classic tactics genre staples. But in that, instead of like shooting or fighting, as with like a lot of tactics game, you play a dreamy dodgeball game that Desta, the protagonist, is like playing out in their dreams. And also, it's a game with roguelike elements. So you are playing through your dreams, and when you lose a match, Desta wakes up from their dream and then has to go to sleep again and kind of replay some of those memories. But each time they're different. Each time the dream gives them different challenges. So yeah, to kind of talk about that roguelike element, what does that mean for our game? Like, what does a play session in our game look like? Well, you start the dream, you start off playing on your own against simple opponents. You defeat them, you progress, you get different abilities, you can equip them to Desta, you gain teammates that then you can team up against other characters, you defeat key memories, overcome them, and kind of recruit characters from Desta's real life into the dream as teammates. And then when you fail, Desta wakes up from the dream world, and yeah, you start again, you start the next dream, but it's going to be different this time, different abilities, different types of opponents, and yeah, different chances for you to like use what you've learned as you've played. So where did Desta come from? Where was the initial idea? Well, at Us Two Games, this was we've tried out a couple of different objective statements for us as a company. I know it sounds a little bit corny, but this was the one at the time, and this is one I still think speaks to me personally quite a lot, in that bringing what's meaningful about games to everyone. As game developers, as people interested in games, we obviously have a lot of memories and like fun that we have in games, but also kind of like things that they've taught us. And what we want to do is kind of bring people into that may be put off by like orcs and goblins and mechs and guns. I mean, I enjoy games, all those things, but like a lot of people will be put off by that. So how do we bring people into the fun and the kind of the interest and the mastery that like we gain through playing games? Desta, the project, is very much a product of lockdown development. The very beginning of prototyping it was pretty much when a few weeks after we'd first gone into lockdown. So it was a game made through some of our anxieties and sensibilities produced by lockdown, but also it was made in that context of us being remote for the first time. Very much in the studio team having to like change and accommodate that kind of remote-only working style. And the objectives when we were prototyping, one of the key things that really like stuck in our minds when we were thinking about what game do we want to make next, was that we wanted a game where the player learns mastery over time. Like a lot of Us Two Games are puzzle games, which are really fun and really satisfying, but there's only one way to solve them, and you kind of you work out what the knack is, or the secret is. You learn the trick, and then if you come back, you already know it. You've either forgotten it or you know it. So we wanted games. Here's some like examples of games that I really enjoy that have a lot of mastery in it, like Hitman, like Into the Breach, that will come up a few times in this talk. Games that you can come back to again and you can play better than you did last time. It's also a game about sport. We were kind of honestly excited about making a game that took some of the kind of fun, competitive aspects of sport and bringing it into a game setup. I was also reading this book, early pandemic, The Infinite Playground by Bernie DeKoven and Holly Bramazio, which is a game which explores kind of playground games in kids and like what the kind of social dynamics are there, and also just some fun games. I was really craving hanging out with my friends in person, reading this book, and a lot of the kind of playground sensibilities are in Desta, in the kind of the game and the version of Dodgeball that we show and like that we have you play. And there was also an older prototype made by a few people at the studio that had been made like maybe 3 years previously, that had a very different take on on what it kind of looked like, but fundamentally it was a game, a turn-based, grid-based game about throwing a ball, getting people out. And that older prototype was something that we kind of, we want to return there and get some of that, like the interest that was there, but kind of reapproach it with all the learnings from the last 3 years. So to kind of summarize it, these were our kind of key objectives: a game with problems to solve rather than puzzles, and that you could apply mastery; a game about playground sports rather than professional sports, and taking this older prototype that we had some excitement for and we wanted to kind of reapproach.
So that benefit you have working obviously with a studio that's been around for a few years, you have potentially some older prototypes in the cupboard somewhere you can look back on for inspiration?
Yeah, and I also think with a bit of distance on a prototype, or on any project, you realize things that worked or didn't work. You can kind of stew on an idea for a bit longer in the back of your head, rather than like all the answers need to be had now, and I've only been thinking about this idea for the past few weeks. I do think that helped Desta, and I think it helps sometimes that those ideas that you've been mulling over for a longer time kind of stew in their own flavors a bit. Nice. So now I'm going to talk about the process of deconstructing and reconstructing. So to kind of break that down, we're going to talk about like the process of prototyping, assessing the genre of tactics, creating pillars from those prototypes and that assessment, and then how we developed playtests and reassess those kind of aims. Our objective when prototyping is often to build one mechanic at a time, to kind of see what you've built, look at it, assess it, and work out what to put on top of it, rather than building a whole bunch of systems in our minds and then trying to build a prototype one step at a time. I think it really helped for Desta. I don't think it works for every game type, but I think it did. It really helped here for this project. So I've dug up some old GIFs from the project at its very beginning. Here you can see characters moving around on a grid, the first throwing of a physics ball, this kind of idea of just throwing at your friends in order to pass to them and hit your opponents. And we ended up with this thing quite early on that we liked, and kind of I talked about a bit as our peanut butter and lemon curd, like a flavor combination that you wouldn't expect to work, but that works surprisingly well. I recommend it in a sandwich myself, of the kind of tactics grid, the rigidity of that kind of tile-based movement, and physics throwing, where this kind of ball ping-pongs around a bit like a peggle ball or something as it moves around the space. So yeah, here was the prototype we kind of ended up with after a couple of weeks. It looks very basic. It has some Earthbound sprites in there. It's very simple, but it actually, under the hood, is a lot of it shares so much DNA with the game we ended up shipping. It's the same size grid, it's similar numbers of characters, there's a lot that was worked out in those early weeks and that we built on top of that informed what we did. So yeah, now I'm going to kind of talk about assessing the genre. You kind of heard me talk a little bit about the roguelike elements. This talk is going to focus on the tactics-based elements, so we don't get too off-piste. But yeah, we're going to kind of look at the turn-based tactics genre. It's a genre that I really like, and I kind of took a lens to try and work out what it was that intrigued me about it and what was great about it. Thematically, it's about using a bunch of characters together. It's about teamwork. You often have multiple units on the board that you're trying to work together. And it's about this kind of like, you're taking on a match, you're seeing whether you win, and then you're moving on into the future through a series of battles or matches or whatever it may be. So it's kind of this good framework for how a player progresses through a game. Abstractly, it's a game about mastery. It hits that kind of bullet point that we really wanted. It gives you problems rather than puzzles. Units move around, characters move around, the board state changes, and you can't just use one tactic and like rinse through it. It ends up with a lot of planning in your head. I saw a talk years and years ago now about the kind of interesting thing about looking at a chessboard. If you know, even like to a basic level, how to play chess, you're looking at it and you don't see it in its static form. You look at where you might move your piece. So it's kind of a map of possibility in front of you. And it also allows for multiple different play styles. And mechanically, this is a bit dry, but it's grid-based movement with line of sight elements. It's got special abilities. That's something that people like. Each character feels a bit different because they've got something special about them. And also this kind of turns and action points is something that's really understood. Most people have played board games. Most people understand taking turns in a match. And it kind of worked well for the kind of game we wanted to portray. But all those kind of great things, kind of let's talk about what was getting in the way. We kind of assessed what was in the way when a casual player, or just a player who hadn't played a tactics game before, what might get in the way of them jumping in with a tactics game at first blush, or might kind of put them off if they try and play 5-10 minutes of it, and it's just kind of, it's overwhelming. How do we reduce that noise? The first thing was like large numbers and overly granular. All the games I'm showing here, even if I'm like pointing out things about them that we wanted to change, they're all games I really enjoy. I love XCOM, I love Mario & Rabbids Kingdom Battle. They're both great tactics games. But they have like these numbers. You can see here like the health that Luigi's getting is 56. But the health these other characters are getting 80. Why is it different? You're kind of like learning. You're having to deal with a lot of numbers and a lot of units and a lot of complexity. Information overload, kind of leading on for those large numbers. A lot of these games have a lot of different stats, a lot of different abilities, a lot of things you can play with. But it's very overwhelming if you don't know how a tactics game works. Violent themes, we kind of touched on this earlier. Like these were, at the time I took the screenshot about a year ago, these were the top selling tactics games on Steam at the time. And most of them have violent or semi-violent themes. And yeah, that might not be what you're kind of interested in. But there are ways to solve these. And Desta isn't the first one to solve these problems. And I'll talk a bit on that later. But yeah, there are answers even within the genre about how you kind of get around these these barriers. And talk about pillars now. Maybe I should talk a moment about what pillars are in case you aren't aware of them.
What's a pillar, Joel?
Funny you should ask. So pillars is a fairly commonly used game dev term for what the kind of key concepts or ideas that are in your game that you often, when you're adding something to the game or you're trying to assess how your game is doing against the idea you had originally, you look to the pillars and go, oh, are we meeting these as best we can? And so for Desta, we had these pillars in the pitch about what the concept was about. It was about a diverse cast of characters and personalities. It was a long-form game that you can play over multiple sessions. That was something we wanted to hit with the mastery idea, that you would come back again and it would be a longer game than our previous games that are around like 2 or 3 hours each. That we wanted to leave players with an emotional message, something we often do at Us Two Games. But that it was a game with style and depth that's approachable to casual and experienced players alike. And these are very thematic in a lot of ways, very broad. And what we wanted to do is take these and give ourselves design pillars. When we're thinking about mechanics, when we're thinking about levels, when we're thinking about abilities, how do we assess those? And how do we create those? And the way, another thing we sometimes talk about in game development is personas. It's a very kind of marketing-y term, but who are the types of people we want to play and enjoy this game? And here were 4 of our key personas that we had. You can see at the top in the left, we've got this one with a crown on. That's our most important persona, the first-time tactics player. Someone who's played games before, but maybe never strategic ones. And then we've got these other players who have maybe played tactics games before, but they're someone top right, the one-run player, player who wants to get through the story, see what the story's got to offer them, and is enjoying the tactics, but it's maybe not the reason they're there. And then the bottom left and the bottom right, you've got these players who are into their tactics. They've played other tactics games before. What are we offering them as player personas? But you can't make a game for all people. Sometimes you have to make a call as who's the most important, and you can see here the little crown shows that for us, that first-time tactics player was the most important person on the board. And what we wanted people to do is move from that first-time tactics player into a type of player who would evolve into one of the others. It's Raichu.
Is that how long that always took?
Yeah.
It was a long little...
That's a long evolution,
yeah.
GIF. So taking all this research that we had and taking this lovely concept art and these personas and this prototype, we wanted to make our design pillars informed by all this work. A lot of these are going to be answers to things we've already said. We don't want big numbers. What's the answer to that? We want easy to understand numbers. We want players to look at the screen and know the number of things on the screen and understand what's going on. We want this because it reduces cognitive load with the number of units, the HP, the number of balls. We wanted to limit power growth so that it never got totally out of hand. We didn't want characters running around with 15 HP. We didn't want you throwing around 8 balls at once. But And the reason we didn't want this is we want each action, each throw, each move to have a high level of meaning to you, the player, in like a tactical choice. We didn't want you just throwing out 10 moves and then like seeing what happened. A lot of our audience is from the mobile background, and yeah, we really wanted to make a tactics game that was truly built for mobile and built for those first-time tactics players. And that kind of low number information means that there's a really readable board state. Here you can see Into the Breach with a lovely 8x8 grid, which is the same size as Desta's. After playing Into the Breach, it kind of set the standard a bit for us of what we were aiming for in terms of the fun of a tactics game that was on a very small screen. But yeah, as I was talking about with the chess analogy earlier, like with a small and readable game state, you can hopefully play the game in your head as much as you are playing on the phone or on the Switch or on the PC. You're looking at the game, you're not trying to predict what your next move or what the opponent's next move is. It's very mobile friendly, as he brought up already, and everything's on the table. You can just look at it at one glance. You don't have to pan around. There's no unit you've forgotten about because you're not looking in the right corner of the map. And playful feel. This was really important to us. We haven't kind of touched on it in a little while, but that like physicsy fun was really important to us, of the kind of the pull back and go aspect, the slingshot feel of throwing the ball around. We wanted to make the core verb you were doing of throwing the ball or using your special abilities to be very physical and fun rather than just tapping on a menu. It meant that we could have even less hidden information, and you could get better at it over time. At the beginning, when you're first picking up this game, you're probably not sure how the ball's going to bounce around a corner, but after a lot of play sessions, you're going to be kind of pinging that ball in like trick shots to feel really cool. And the kind of a phrase that came up as we were progressing with the game was this idea of the ball has to feel fun, physical, and fair to throw around. Like it has to hit all three of those. The 3 Fs. Those are the pillars that we wrote down for ourselves, the things that we wanted to hit, and you may notice that one was missing. We didn't write this down, but it was something that we kept saying over and over again to each other, so it never left our minds. This idea that the fundamental thing we were trying to do is introduce the fun of a tactics game to players who hadn't interacted with it before. So let's talk a bit about a gameplay example. This was us coming up with different enemy types. This is a literal screenshot from some of the enemy types we considered for the game. 3 out of 4 of these ended up being in the final game not looking like this. Maybe the game design rules were slightly different, but we prototyped them in this very like online, like infinite whiteboard way using a program called Miro. We essentially paper prototyped the game, but because we were all at home in lockdown, we were trying to find new tools to do this, and we ended up using Miro a lot, creating little boards, like throwing the ball around in our heads, like playing against each other to try and come up with new enemy types, new ability types, and also like trying to find out what maps are, like what map layouts were interesting, what kind of boss fights would be interesting, before building them digitally. This is when we were really early and we didn't have all the tech up and running. And yeah, this really helped us explore a wide range of ideas for what to add to Desta. We really wanted enemies to encourage different player behaviors and tactics. We wanted to be able to use those enemies in different combinations to create different types of challenges for the players, and we wanted to really visually convey their capabilities quickly and clearly so that it kind of fit those pillars we were talking about with like, oh, I look at the board and I know what's going to happen there. So here you can see some of our enemy types that we ended up in the final game, looking a bit different from the Mega Man images that we just saw earlier. So yeah, we had quite like, we had human characters, but we were trying to change their kind of body type so they were really readable in silhouette form. It's like, oh, this one's the big strong one. Oh, this one's the character who like sits in place and uses their mind powers to attract the ball. Something the art team worked really hard on is kind of having these kind of like, oh, I know who's on my team and who's on the enemy team without having to put big glowy squares around their feet. Yeah. Know who's my enemy and who's my opponent and who's my friend.
Anyone in activewear is your enemy.
Yes, definitely. Take those out, those gym rats.
Yeah.
So yeah, and through this process, like one of the early game enemies the Big Shot really teaches target prioritization and ball starvation, two of our kind of tactics. The first one, you kind of learn quite quickly that he's going to cause a lot of damage, so you need to take him down so he's not going to be able to take out your team. You learn to prioritize him over the smaller enemies, and also that you can kind of starve him of being able to pick up more balls to throw at you. You can kind of sit on them, so because if he can't throw a ball at you, he can't get you. So yeah, let's kind of wrap up a bit now. Let's have some takeaways. So that process of early prototyping through to kind of solidifying it into a game design and those early game design decisions in kind of pre-production. We assess the genre, what's the core, what's the thing we don't want to lose, and what's getting in the way of people enjoying it. The prototyping being building one step at a time, one mechanic on a time, so that you can assess what's missing from the thing you've got, and that you then create pillars that guide your later choices, like making the enemy types. How are we making those? What rules are we adhering to? It doesn't mean you can't change those rules later if they become too restrictive, but yeah, like what are those rules so that you kind of stay consistent and the vision stays on track? And the kind of final takeaways is boiling down those designs to their bare minimums, like a really good roux, before you then build them up, and that you can make complex genres like tactics really approachable, and in doing so you can find like innovative and fun ways to do things that will kind of surprise and delight new players.
I just realised you've been throwing in food metaphors every now and again.
That wasn't on purpose, that's just me.
Was it just the peanut butter and lemon curd and then the roux sauce? Was that it? Was there any more?
I'm sure there were other things. I'm sure I should have said something about taste it as you're cooking, or something like that. But yeah, that's me. That's the talk. Thank you very much.
What was the biggest challenge in prototyping it? As in, Us Two Games hasn't done a tactics game before, or a sports game, or anything like this really.
I think one of the biggest challenges is a kind of a silly one. That's some funny wording, but is learning what it means to lose at a game. Alba, Assemble with Care, Monument Valley, those are all games that don't have a loss state. You can't lose those games. There's no game over screen, and we were making the first game with a game over screen. And there was a lot of consideration and thinking going into how do we make it okay to lose? How do we make it interesting to lose rather than just you retry the same thing again? Like, how do we do that? And we decided to do it through a roguelike, like taking some of those roguelike genre aspects. I suppose another thing was that we were designing this game to come out on Netflix, and we're kind of interested in what does a game look like that you can add things to over time. After we released it, we learnt a bunch of stuff about how people were playing it, both in terms of difficulty, but also about what we wanted to add in terms of new abilities. And we had this kind of roadmap and plan for what we wanted to add. So even after the game came out, we were kind of adjusting it, looking at those pillars, reassessing the game and whether it was getting in the way of itself. And because it was on mobile, because of the world we live in now, with kind of like game updates, we could really improve that game and not get in the way of the story because of the type of game that it is, and that we could kind of just add in more tools, more cool challenges for you to face off against.
What's your Desta play style? How do you like to play?
I like to play super accurate. I think this is because I was one of the designers really involved in how the throwing works. I always like to, I was talking about it earlier, starve people of balls so that I'm like taking a shot and then it's coming back to me and never giving the enemy an opportunity to get hit on me by just not letting them have any balls around.
If anyone has any other questions, can they drop you an email? Can they reach out?
Yeah, they can reach out on social media at RobotJoel on most social media websites. But yeah, that's probably the best way to get me.
Yeah, or leave a comment.
Or leave a comment.
Or please like and subscribe.
Yeah, please.